I'm Brittany, and we're so glad you're joining us for 242 at Home.
And I'm John, and this service is designed just for you so you can tune in from the comfort of your own home.
And over the next 30 minutes, we'll worship together, hear a message from Kevin, and then send you off with a challenge.
We're going to hear a message from Kevin within 30 minutes. Yeah, right. We're in the week 3 of Rainy Day, so if you've missed past services, you can watch them on demand right now. And the best way to do that and stay connected with us around here is through the 242 app.
That's right. 242 has an app. Just search 242 Church in the App Store and then download it right now.
But before we get to Kevin, let's worship.
Hey 242, my name is Caroline, this is Albo, this is John. We are some of the worship pastors, and we want to invite you into a time of worship now. So wherever you are, I hope that you would engage with this worship, sing with us as we sing these songs.
Where I lay it down, heavy burden, heavy crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down, every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. And I will make room for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. And I will make room for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. Is where I lay it down, every burden, every crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down, every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. And I will make room for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. I will make room for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. Up the ground of all my tradition, break down the walls of all my religion. Your way's better, your way's better. So shake up the ground of all my tradition, break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better, and your way is better. Shake up the ground of all my tradition, break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better, and your way is better. Shake up the ground of all my tradition, break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better, and your way is better. I will make room for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. And I will make room for you to do to do whatever you want to.
Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting sun, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. And great is your faithfulness to me. Oh, great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting sun, I will praise your name. Oh, great is your faithfulness to me. I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope and firm foundation. You'll never let me down. I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope and firm foundation. He'll never let me down. I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope and firm foundation. He'll never let me down. And great is your faithfulness to me. And great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting sun, I will praise your name. Oh, great is your faithfulness to me.
Hey everybody, I'm Kevin. I'm one of the pastors around here, and you remember when we were kids and we had a rainy day? Like when we couldn't go outside to play, it was excruciating. And it's interesting these days that kids don't really have that frame of reference. The equivalent of a rainy day for kids nowadays is when there's a power outage and the internet's out, right? Like when they can't play whatever video games they do, which are way cooler than when we were kids. And I say this to my kids. I'm like, you guys, you're going to need to develop real hobbies outside of just like TV and video games, because you're not always going to have the internet and power around. And thinking of power outages, it's also weird that there's been a direct correlation of how many times my house has lost power since I bought a generator. Like we got one because we lost power all the time, and ever since we got it, the gas goes bad in my generator before we ever actually need to use it to save the food in the fridge. But that generator, actually, that's like a rainy day fund. Like when we talk about saving for rainy days and those kind of adages, it's that idea of being prepared for the inevitable whatever, whether it's a power outage with a generator or just a rainy day fund that all of us should have some money set aside, where if something breaks, if the fridge breaks, if the car tires pop or whatever, we have money to take care of it. And unfortunately for many of us, we're not really prepared for the rainy days. We're just trying to get by each day. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about this rainy day idea around money, and that Jesus talks about money a ton. And so we talked in week 1 about how greed isn't good. Last week, we talked about how debt isn't good. And next week, we're going to talk about how God is good. But today, we're going to talk about one more not good, and it might be your least favorite. Are you ready for it? It's that we're not good. Like, it's not just that greed isn't good, or that some of us aren't very good at managing our money, or we're not saving enough, or we're not strategic enough with the things that we do with our money, or we're not generous enough. for a lot of us, like we just aren't good. There's a deeper problem. And I know that there are some of you who are really good with finances and you save and you give generously and you have your future planned for, and you are the exception, because most people in our country, sadly, that's just not true for. In fact, in a recent Pew Charitable Trust survey, they released a report called The Liabilities of the Family Balance Sheet. And it found that 85% of Americans are living beyond their means. And just recently, CNBC reported that since COVID hit, 63% of Americans, think of this for a second, nearly 2 out of 3 of us are living paycheck to paycheck. It means we're not prepared for the rainy days that will inevitably come. And most of us, it's not just our greed or our debt that's the problem. There's a deeper principle, an issue that we need to do some work on. And turns out Jesus talked about this a ton. And the truth is that greed and debt are really just the outgrowth of the byproduct of a deeper kind of heart issue that I want to show you this when Jesus taught on this. If you have a Bible, open up to Luke chapter 16. And we're going to listen to what Jesus says. We'll start in verse 10 and hear kind of where he lands. He's teaching and he lands here, and then we'll back up and read the story that he tells to kind of illustrate this. But starting in verse 10, Jesus says this: "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with a little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own?" Listen to what he says here: "No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." That kind of hits pretty heavy from Jesus. And the problem's not the money. The problem is what the money leads us towards, and our greed or our mismanagement of it, or our trying to hoard or trying to get from money something that it just can't give us. You know, it goes to this deeper heart issue, which Jesus is pointing us towards, that oftentimes we think that it's just someday that we'll be in this better place. But Jesus is reminding us it starts today if we'll do the work to follow him and to give our lives and our hearts to him. But it's not that money is evil. It's not that like trying to be successful in life is evil. It's that there's unfortunately evil in our hearts. And I know that you and I, we like to think that we're not evil because we think of evil only as like really, really terrible people, murderers and people that rob and kill people, or like extremists of some form. But we like to compare. But what the gospel teaches us is that, no, we're all sinners. Every one of us is a sinner. So whether you're like in your own mind a really bad person or a pretty good person or a pretty regular dude or gal, we're all sinners in need of a savior. We all have evil in our heart that we need to work on. And greed and debt are just the outgrowth of that issue. We need to do a deeper work because none of us are good enough on our own. We all sin, and in that separation that we have with God, every one of us is in need of Jesus. Every one of us stands equal at the foot of the cross, no matter how we think we compare. And even though we like to kind of have our hierarchies of comparison, that doesn't exist when we really understand the gospel. And he's trying to point us back that money in itself is not the problem. It's the way we try to use it and the way we end up attaching our own worth to it. And we miss the opportunity of what money can actually be in our life. Now let's go back to the beginning of Luke chapter 16 and see the story that Jesus tells to land where he did. And now Jesus would tell parables, little stories to illustrate things all the time. And many times they were kind of confusing, and the people who first heard him and his disciples were confused by him. But this is one of his most confusing ones, because if you've ever read it, or as we read it, maybe you'll be reminded of it, it seems to be like Jesus is suggesting that he's like commending someone who's been dishonest. And it kind of just reads confusing. And so let's jump up to the top in verse 1. And I recently was listening to a devotional by Alan Parr. If you've ever heard him, look him up. Really good. And he was talking about this, and it just inspired me for us to talk about this today. And in verse 1, it says this: Jesus told his disciples there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer." All right, so Jesus starts this story, and essentially there's this rich guy, wealthy, he's got a bunch of possessions, and he has this manager he's entrusted with these possessions to take care of them and to kind of manage the wealth and grow it. And he's been accused, and it seems like the way that Jesus tells the story, it almost doesn't matter whether he actually had or not, but he's been accused of being dishonest with the wealthy person's possessions. And so it's not that hard to understand so far, but that's the setup that Jesus gives us. So now verse 3 and 4. It says, "The manager said to himself, 'What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I am not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses.'" So, translation, again, still pretty straightforward. He is just realizing, like, I'm about to lose my job, and I got to make some friends. So he's trying to come up with a plan, because he's like, I'm not strong enough to like do manual labor. I don't know how to use a tape measure. And he's like, I'm way too prideful to go out and beg for money. So he comes up with a plan, and here's what he does next. So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 950 gallons of olive oil, he replied. And the manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. He gives the guy half off. Verse 7. Then he asked the second, "How much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill and make it 800. So basically, this guy's come up with this plan, this ingenious plan, where he, instead of going and settling all the debts and finishing the job and getting fired, he goes out and he's not going to beg. He's going to go make some friends. And so he goes out and reduces the amount owed to the master. You know, that's how you read it, right? He gives them a discount, and it seems like he's doing them this huge favor. And then I guess his plan is that then he'll be taken care of if he does this. Now, that's still not too hard to understand, right? But here's where it gets really confusing. Here's what Jesus says next, verse 8 and 9. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are shrewd in dealing with their own kind, more than their own kind, than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into the eternal dwellings. And you're like, wait, what? Like, if you've read this, you've been like, wait, what? Jesus, that doesn't make any sense. Like, how can the master, why would Jesus tell the story in the way that the person who owned the wealth is praising this person who seems to have cheated him out of money? And the question really then is, what is going on in the story that makes it seem like it's wrong? Like, in our culture, if we were business managers and we had wealth, we might hire someone to work for us to manage that and take care of collecting debts on accounts, and we would pay them a fee to do that in exchange for their work. But that wasn't how it was back then. In the days where Jesus is telling this story, things just worked differently. And so it wouldn't happen like that. You would hire someone like a steward, a manager, who would go out and collect debts. You didn't pay them anything. What they did is they would go out and collect the debts, and whatever they charged the person above and beyond what was owed was how they got paid. That's what they could keep. They could put that in their pocket. That's how they made their cut. And so you didn't make just like a salary. You had to go out and collect on debts to get paid. And now, as a side note, this is why the Jewish tax collectors were so despised by the people of their communities. Because not only are you collecting taxes on behalf of who they see as the enemy, the oppressive Roman and pagan culture, but you're our own Jewish brothers, and you're collecting not just taxes, but more than actually so that you can get paid. So that's what's happening in the story. He apparently had made some mistakes and was dishonest, and he's going to get fired, but he comes up with a different plan where it's not that he had been dishonest before, but in this moment, he's not cheating the master out of money. He's actually forfeiting his own profit in this moment so that those people win. They think they get a discount, and the manager, like the owner, he wins because his debts are settled. And then He's hoping that through this act of goodwill, that when he gets fired, he'll have some people to look out for him. Maybe he'll be able to find a new job or something. So the owner says to him, that was a genius plan. Like, that's how Jesus tells the story. You're still fired because you were a dishonest person, but I like the way you're thinking. And doesn't that just kind of, I don't know, it makes you wrestle with like, it seems like we should just give everything away or like I don't know, like the story just seems to be a contradiction. But I believe that there are a few lessons for you and I to learn in this story that apply to these rainy days and to our management of all that God has entrusted us with. So the first thing I want to say is, I think one of the biggest things that this reminds us of, which Jesus would teach on many, many times, is that you and I need to remember that we are the stewards. Remember that God owns everything. There's nothing that you have or have been given. There's no talent that you've used to earn income and grow in a career that isn't from God. Everything you have is a gift from God. And you and I need to be reminded that we are stewards. Everything we have in life, we become like the manager of the story. Our job is to manage it well. But the second thing that I think this story challenges you and I is that we need to make sure we're honest. We need to be honest, which is like of course. But dishonesty as followers of Jesus, lacking integrity, eventually will catch up to us. And it won't just make us look bad, it'll make Jesus look bad. You may be able to get away with it for a little while, but it will catch up to you. And it might not happen immediately, but for those of us who are following Jesus, as this parable shows, like at some point we will have to give an account for the decisions that we made, for the way that we managed all that we have been given in life, everything that we have. And so essentially the principle is there's no amount of earthly riches that's ever worth being dishonest about. In fact, just a few chapters earlier in Luke chapter 9, Jesus said, "What good is it if someone gains the whole world and yet loses or forfeits their very self?" Like, what good is it if you start the best business anybody's ever heard of, or you make more money than anybody has ever seen, but you don't grow into the person God's called you to be? See, there's no cutting corners for profits that is worth it when you're a follower of Jesus. There's no taking advantage of other people to profit from it that's acceptable for followers of Jesus. There's no under the table hiding it so the IRS doesn't know about it that's worth it. Following Jesus calls us to set aside greed and to manage money and everything with integrity and with character, because it's becoming more like God that is at stake. And so the third thing that I think we need to learn is, of course, be reminded that we're just stewards of everything. Of course, be honest. But I think the third thing is that we need to be wise. Notice what it says in verse 8. It says that the children of this age are more shrewd than the children of the light in dealing with their own people. It's an interesting way for Jesus to talk about that. And I think if you don't get anything else from this parable or having to listen to me today, I think this is the big point for you and I. See, the children of this age is just everyone who's not a follower of Jesus, for people who are not believers. But the children of the light, that's those of us who are following Jesus, and he's supposed to be the Lord of our life, and people should see that. And so essentially Jesus' whole point in this parable is that if unbelievers will stop at nothing, and they will go to great lengths to make sure to ensure that they have a future and that they'll be taken care of, how much more shrewd, strategic, how much more urgency should we as followers of Jesus have to connect with people in this life and use all that God's given us? See, in the world around us, it's like Jesus is reminding us that people will take risks. They'll start companies. They'll go back to school and get advanced degrees. They'll plan and strategize, and they'll do whatever it takes to move their business or their opportunities or their corporations to the next level so they can get ahead. There's nothing that the people in this world won't do to secure their future. But sadly, Christians, not only will we not often use the same creativity and ingenuity and wisdom to advance the church, so that use the stuff that unbelievers use to advance the truth of who Jesus is in the world. But more importantly, believers oftentimes are less concerned about securing their heavenly future. And we just get overly concerned and focused on the here and now. We just think, well, I'm believing Jesus, so heaven's taken care of, and now I'm just going to live my life. And Jesus is saying, no. heaven is like the real riches. And everything we should do today with our time and our energy should be preparing us, growing us to be in relationship with God, to mature, to become more like him. Do you know what is more important than your retirement investments? Or do you know what's more important than your hope of hitting the jackpot in the lottery? Your eternity. Did you know, actually it's interesting because it sounds like I'm joking about the lottery. Did you know the average household in the United States of America only has $400 of savings for a rainy day? But the average household in the United States of America spends $1,000 a year on lottery tickets hoping to hit it big. Because we get so distracted by the possibility. And we don't just live in the here and now and do the work that it takes, not just in our money, but in growing into the people, the men, the women that God's called us to be. Which leads to the next thing that I think you and I can take away from this parable that Jesus teaches, is that we need to be generous. Not only should we be more shrewd and work hard, but man, we should be so much more generous. The more successful we become, the more radically generous we should become so that we are impacting the world that is around us. Notice the way Jesus said it. He said, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Jesus is saying that we should always be using our wealth, all that comes to us in this life, everything that we can be successful at, use it for the sake of others. Use it to advance his kingdom. Use it to make his name more famous. In other words, you and I should be using our wealth to pour into other people's lives. So that whenever we get to heaven someday, there might be this long reception line welcoming us in. It's not just that God's going to like high five us and say, well done, my good and faithful servant, but there will be people who track us down to say thank you. Because of your generosity, it changed their life. Because of your investment, they were able to start a business. Or because you gave to them when they were hungry. And or you invested in your local church that changed their whole family history. Or you helped send them on a mission trip that changed the course of their life. There will be people who track you and I down in heaven to say thanks. And here's the last lesson that I think Jesus has for you and I. Because as he tells the story, we'll end right where we began, where Jesus says in verse 10, whoever can be trustworthy with very little can also be trustworthy with much. You know, it's easy for you and I to think that if we only had more, then we would give more. And so I think the last takeaway for you and I is a reminder that we must be faithful. To be faithful, to be trustworthy. If we made more money, it's easy to think that we'd become more generous. And it's actually just an excuse. That's what Jesus is trying to point out to you and I. That all we have control of is today. And many times we think like, well, I'll give more to the church someday, and I'll invest more in that someday, and I'll help others someday. But Jesus is saying we need to be careful in thinking like that. Because yes, we do need to be saving for the future, and we do need to be planning and getting out of debt, and we do need to prepare for our future. But God has called us to prioritize him and our generosity first. And so we need to be faithful with whatever we have today, not deferring it to a someday. And so Jesus is basically saying, he's like, look, if you can't be generous now, rest assured you won't be generous someday when you have a lot. If you're stingy now, you'll be stingy when you have more. If you can't be faithful now, you can't be faithful later. And so I really think Jesus is calling you and I for a moment to honestly assess, how much are we deferring to the future? The faithful steps he's calling us to take in our finances today. Not to be faithful someday. You and I need to be faithful today, to not defer his calling to someday, or defer his calling to be more generous or live more generous or live with others in mind more. It's not a someday thing. It's a decision you and I need to make today. What does it look like for us to take a next step in that? And I'm not here to guilt you. I know. I just want to try to inspire you as Jesus. I feel like he challenges me in this, and I hope he's challenging you, that we all have a step to take further in being faithful and generous with all that God has given us. And that really is the main question that I think we're left with is, who will you serve most? What will be top priority, right? Jesus said you can't serve both money and God, and it's a question of our love, our heart. And that's why money can be so dangerous. It's an amazing gift, but we can attach our heart to it without even meaning to. And God knows our heart, and he's asking you and I to test it, to be honest about it. And even if you and I, in a moment of honesty, can say, man, we really look to money to be a lot of things for us. I know God's not even angry. He's sad because he knows that there's so much more for you and better that he can do through you, living generously, trusting him with your wealth and your whole life and being in submission to him, because you can't serve money and God. None of us think that we're serving money, and yet it has such a hold on our hearts. It leads us down paths of greed and of debt and of living beyond our means and of trying to get something out of this life that we just can't. Money can't be our security, but God can. Money cannot affirm our value and our worth and our love, but God already has. And so it's time for you and I to kind of crystallize what this means for us today and to commit to taking a next step to becoming more like Jesus.
Each weekend, we'll leave you with a challenge.
Yeah, whatever your next step is, whether it's growing in generosity or connecting with a small group, or maybe it's just filling out our handy dandy connect form, just go to 242community.com/next.
As always, we're here to help you take your next steps with God. We hope you have an awesome week, and we'll see you here next time.